Welcome back, and now it's time for our local press review for today, Tuesday, the 11th of July. And I'm joined today with Mrs. Eissa, and she's an international law expert as well as a political and social analyst. And we will be starting off with اليوم السابع newspaper, where we read President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi held a meeting on Monday with Prime Minister Sharif Ismail, Minister of Trade and Industry Tariq Qabil, Minister of Public Business Sector Ashraf al-Sharqawi, and Minister of Agriculture and Land Reclamation Abdel Menaim el-Banna. The meeting tackled ways of developing and supporting cotton cultivation, as well as the promotion of the spinning and weaving industry to support the national economy, as well as meeting the needs of the local market and increasing exports. The meeting also reviewed the spinning and weaving as a labor-intensive industry, as well as Egypt's competitive advantages in cotton production worldwide in light of its quality and reputation in the international markets. President el-Sisi stressed the importance to set an appropriate price to buy cotton from farmers in support of the Egyptian farmer, and to encourage the expansion of cotton cultivation in the coming years to cover the needs of the local market and export. Well, actually, it's a long piece of news, but I'd rather continue it with you, Mrs. Eissa, the international law expert as well as political and social expert as well. I'd like you to tell me more, how do you see this piece of news and the importance of the revitalizing of our cotton industry?
Of course, the headline, how I read the news, is that Egypt is having aspiration to increase in export.
Yes.
And when it comes to cotton, we have a large history specifically in this arena.
Yes.
Currently speaking, China is the largest country that produces this cotton, and it uses it mainly domestically.
Yes.
But with Egypt, before the 25th of January, we were such a huge trademark internationally when it comes to cotton, and we were established in this area.
Yes.
However, after the revolution, this status has been declining dramatically.
Yes.
And what President Sisi is doing, and all these headlines that you've just read, indicates that we are having now an initiative, and we've put out the intentions to gain back this trademark that Egypt used to have before the revolution when it comes to cotton.
Yes.
However, there has to be a strategic plans. Like you've read in the news, they're speaking about farmers, how it's going to be done. Like the intention is well known and is definitely going to have positive outcome. But without a strategic plan to be followed, for instance, creating a committee to follow up on the progress, the setbacks, nothing going to progress in this area specifically.
Now, you know that we used to have a huge public sector textile industry and factories, and there are debates in the society. Should we keep our public factories and renovate them, or should we sell them out? How do you see that, and what's your view on it?
My views always, whenever it comes to the public and private sector, is to have realistic expectation and look at the facts. Because people always like to sympathize with the public sector, but let's be realistic. We need tangible outcome. The tangible outcome in a country like Egypt, with our economic statuses, is going to increase if we give the private sector a piece of the cake, like they say for the example. Because the private sector is more focused. Unfortunately, the public sector is more chaotic. So you need to enhance the public sector with giving it the tools. You need to give it the mechanism for success, skills, plans, entrepreneurship, people that have the know-how, which is available in the private sector. That's why the private sector is more successful.
Do you feel that we need to change the laws in general to be able to increase production in Egypt? Because even when we talk about investment, the investments that come in usually they are consumer investments, and we talk about trade, and then we find out that actually we're importing more than we're exporting. So how can we start becoming a manufacturing country in a sense?
The problem here with Egypt, we have laws for everything you can imagine. The problem is enforcement of the law.
Yes.
Recently, the new laws that has been done for investment is creating a very safe environment for foreign investors to come in Egypt. That's recently. It just happened recently. So now we have a tangible plan. That is a plan for success. The problem is the enforcement of the law. That actually things that we have set out a plan for does happen.
Yes, indeed. And we'll move to the next piece of news. So moving to اليوم السابع newspaper, we read President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi held a meeting on Monday with Prime Minister Sharif Ismail, as well as the Minister of Trade and Industry Tariq Qabil and Minister of Transportation Hisham Arafat. During the meeting, the Minister of Trade and Industry, Engineer Tariq Qabil, reviewed the executive position and relocating and installing the leather industrial facilities of Rubaiki city. The minister said that the first phase has been completed and the places are being allocated to the leather manufacturers who wish to move there. He pointed out that the largest 12 leather factories are expected to start work in Rubaiki city by next September. The minister pointed out that basic facilities for about 40% of allocated lands in the second phase in Rubaiki city were completed. For his part, the president gave his directives to continue relocating the leather specialized industrial facilities to Rubaiki city, stressing the state's commitment to bear the cost of the relocation and installation of industrial facilities that will move to Rubaiki city before the end of next August. The president stressed the necessity to adhere to the specific timetable of the relocation process. How do you read that piece of news?
Before analyzing this piece of news, like, the reader needs to know the historical background behind it in order to appreciate this progress. Because when it comes to the leather, before, the manufacturer and the factories were in an area called Magra al-Ayun. And this creates a horrible environment for manufacturing and the industry itself. And it's the waste output didn't know where it would go to. And from day one, we know that this is not a healthy environment for economical level, environmental level, even for production. So it was logical that they had to be moved to a different city. However, human nature, people were always resilient to change. They didn't want to move at all. So when the first people started go and it showed success, others were encouraged to go ahead and start moving to the new city. But there was always a missing factor, the transportation. If you have something that qualified and can have good output in the future, people need to get there. So the transportation in the news here, where I read it, is such a positive idea because it's always the missing factor. Now that they have the transportation, and it needs to have facilities and it needs to be comfortable to encourage people to go over there and work. So this is a crucial point that is solved, and it's making me very optimistic regarding the idea. And if we start to go on this pattern that you read in the news, we can compete in the international market.
Well, yes, indeed, and we hope so too. And we will be moving to Al-Wafd newspaper, where we read Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri continues his participation in the 44th session of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Ivory Coast. In his speech to the session, Shukri said that terrorism is the greatest danger that must be eradicated from its roots. He said eradicating terrorism requires, alongside the security and military measures, a comprehensive approach that include political, ideological and developmental dimensions. Shukri said that these elements were presented by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi during the Arab Islamic American Summit. The foreign minister also said that the measures taken by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain against Qatar were because of its actions of interfering in the international affairs of countries. Shukri pointed out that Qatar is striving to undermine the security of societies, spread chaos, fund terrorist organizations, harbor terrorists fleeing justice and promote extremist ideology. Shukri also tackled the Palestinian file as well as the situation in Libya. Actually, this meeting was full of a lot of issues. Of course, on top of it would be countering terrorism. Now, how do you see the mechanisms that we have used so far to tackle and counter that important issue?
The mechanism that we've been using so far, from my personal opinion, is completely ineffective, because the mechanism is about naming and shaming, which is what the United Nations has been doing for centuries, and it doesn't come with any exact outcome, because naming and shaming someone doesn't put consequences on them. When it comes to Qatar, we need to be realistic. They have foreign investment outside of their own country with $300 billion. This is a huge investment in all the countries that you can imagine, and hegemonic countries like London and the United States. They buy even clubs. So they have an influence. That's why they're not threatened and they're not easily shaken by these conditions and the naming and shaming. Why? Because they have a strong foundation. They have very few population. They have massive amount of money, massive amount of investment in foreign hegemonic countries, which get them this weight and this unshaken position. So if you want to shake their position and combat terrorism and do what we are hoping to do in the future, we need to have something called realistic point of view. Realistic point of view is that you put things that have constraint on them with consequences. From my opinion, this cannot happen without the United States interference, because only the United States can shake in their position when they threaten their foreign investment in other countries.
So do you feel that we need to put certain embargoes on them and start banning them, in a sense, all their trade?
Exactly, consequences. Exactly, it's a very simple example for a child. I tell you, there's a shame on you, you're not doing this properly. But if I take something dear from you, if you see consequences, shift in behavior could happen. But this naming and shaming, it will never see any results in the future, because they're very well established, and also they're very contradicting. Speaking about the sovereign interference and their sovereignty, but the condition that were set 2013, they are already agreed upon. You're not a persistent objector. You agreed on something and now you're objecting to it. We need to have a stronger conditions and stronger combat when it comes to Qatar and terrorism.
Now, the other part, or the other piece of news that we've read also together, is about Libya. So how do you see the situation in Libya so far, in light of course, that the General Haftar, he has gained Benghazi so far, and he's starting to gain control. But do you think that it might be resolved? How do you see the crisis in Libya?
There is a progress, but it's like in a baby steps. Without the international community interference, I don't think it's going to. The international community need to get together and get hand in hand and help Libya. Look at Syria, for example. We didn't see progress until the international community and Putin started to back Bashar al-Assad. So international community have to interfere. Libya on its own cannot survive.
Well, and we will be moving to another topic. So we will be looking at Al-Akhbar newspaper and read the joint Egyptian-French naval exercise Cleopatra 2017 kicked off with the participation of units from naval forces of both countries. The exercise lasts for several days in the Egyptian territorial waters of the Mediterranean and the Red Seas. Several naval units participate in the exercise, including Egyptian and French Mistral helicopter carriers, a number of frigates, rocket boats, anti-submarine detection aircraft from both sides, as well as Egypt F-16 fighter jets. Now, the importance and the significance of such trainings.
First of all, if anything, such naval always exercise highlights one thing. There's a strong ties, and it strengthens the ties between the two countries. Bilateral exercise always reflect this idea.
Yes.
But when it comes to this news specifically, it also takes us back that we have just taken a lot of weapons and military tools, like the 2 helicopters that we've taken from France. So we need training upon them. And the greatest thing about the bilateral exercise when it comes to military, it gives you the same sense of the warfare, but without going into warfare itself. And it gives you combat technique. And at the same time, we need training on the weapons that we've just bought from France.
Yes, indeed. And from Al Masri Al-Yawm newspaper, we read, Minister of Investment and International Cooperation, Dr. Sahar Nasr, met with Director of the U.S. Agency for International Development in Cairo, Sherry Collin. The two sides discussed bilateral cooperation in combating corruption, supporting the technical education sector, expanding investments in all sectors, as well as supporting and coordinating in all the international financial institutions in order to achieve regional cooperation in economic, developmental and investment fields. The minister called calling to support the participation of the private sector in projects as well as supporting young businessmen and women. Dr. Sahar Nasr called calling to support small and medium-sized enterprises, microfinance as well as the Women Economic Empowerment Fund, which was established in cooperation with the World Bank and the Partnership Initiative in Africa. Actually, there are so many things that took place during that meeting. We have so far, and I haven't read the entire piece of news, there are talks about introduction of investment, there are talks about SMEs, women empowerment. Now, what do we need in Egypt to activate all these programs and MOUs that we tend to sign?
We need two crucial things. First of all, we need to put more highlight on the empowerment of women. Not a lot of people know that there's a fund from the World Bank exists dedicated specifically for women and the small project and the medium project. We need highlights upon that, and we need to know how, because you can give them the fund like what the World Bank do when they give you a fund. They give you conditions, so the fund that they're giving you ends up with having the successful outcome. So we need to have plan, because women have this high inspiration in the country and they want to do their own project and be independent, but they want higher chances of success. There should be training skills, get them to know, have shared experiences with people who succeeded in other third world countries or developing countries, so they have a vision to know which direction to take. We have a fund, and this is beautiful, an empowerment of women, but we need to have more highlight, market the idea. People know that something like that exists, and at the same time help them, let them know how they can succeed. So chances of failure wouldn't be too much.
Yes, we hope so too. And moving to Al-Akhbar newspaper, we read Iraq's Prime Minister Haidar al-Abadi declared victory over a Daesh terrorist group in Mosul on Monday, 3 years after the terrorists seized the city and made it their stronghold in Iraq. Earlier on Monday, Iraqi forces engaged in fighting with the Daesh terrorist group in Mosul as they battled to clear the last terrorist-held pockets in it. Well, again, this is another important piece of news, and Iraq is another area where there are a lot of things and turmoil and a lot of things going on. How do you see that piece of news, and how do you see and evaluate the situation in Iraq?
This piece of news is like at last, because we waited so long for the fall of Daesh in Mosul. It was such a vicious fight. It took so long, even before they started to go in and start to have their plans. Starting the last year, we anticipated that this whole dramatic situation would end by January. And look where we are now. It took so much time than it's anticipated. Like, they do not want to die. So this piece of news is like a dream came true at last. But this is not the end of the fight. They're still in other areas. What's the problem here is that you don't just end a terrorist group. They leave their ideology. Look what's happening in London. So you have not just to kill them, you have afterwards to kill their ideology. But the positive idea is that when the main source is down, like they are just random acts, individual random acts, they're out of control, but by time they fade gradually.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Sama Eissa, international law expert as well as political and social expert as well. Thank you very much for this interview. Well, and that brings us to the end of this edition of our press review, or our local press review actually. But stay tuned for more coming up on Nile TV International.